Hey babe, how are you doing? I hope your week has started out alright and you had some fun over the weekend. If you're new here, hi, welcome to this episode of Between Me and the Ink. My name is Faye and I have notes. So, the last few weeks have been hectic. The last few years have been hectic. Every time a woman has died in the hands of a man, regardless of the context, the manosphere has opted to take a moralistic view and not just blame the victim but also shame them, often labeling them as less than and as somehow deserving of their tragic fate. Every time a woman has died in suspicious circumstances, the men online would somehow jubilate over that death like they have an ongoing agenda to kill all women. It's been hard to understand and even harder to explain how this misogynistic worldview persists in this day and age. We might as well be living in a medieval simulation where everything is modern, but the men still cry witch at any woman that doesn't jump on cue. I would love to engage in a discourse on the psychologies of the Kenyan manosphere in relation to femicide, but I think that will be giving them more attention than they are worth at a personal level. Rather, I want to talk about how we can take care of ourselves a little more during these dark times. As a mostly Kenyan woman, or a woman existing in any woman-hating society, there is a lot of collective stress going around. The misogyny being spewed online has only exacerbated the feelings of insecurity that I, and countless other women, have carried around for decades. In an ideal situation, when you leave the house, you only have a 50% probability of coming back safe and sound. But as a woman, that probability is cut further in half. And that's not the only problem. For as long as you interact with men, and not just in a sexual context, you do not even start that probability game with 100%. We have had women who were killed in their own homes by their husbands, boyfriends, brothers, and even fathers. We had grandmothers being raped and killed by their grandsons, and even mothers by their sons. So essentially, for most of us, safety is a privilege and we are ever so evidently drastically underprivileged. I am aware that there is so much screaming going on internally at this time, and I do not intend to add on to that distress with my vast collection of statistics. But dark times, babe, dark times. In response to the pre-existing stress and the persistent sense of unsafety, there has never been a more crucial time for us to dig into our self-love coffers and ensure that we build the resilience that we need to keep on fighting until the government takes gender-based violence and femicide more seriously. We cannot keep on fighting if we are empty and depleted by the reality of the fight. Being a woman means that you are by default too close to the problem. So while you fight, your body is critically hypervigilant and possibly on overdrive from the emotions that keep flooding. I, for one, cannot go through the conversations on femicide without my blood boiling at least a few times per minute. And that is not about to change for as long as misogyny prevails. And while we can hope that the lawmakers will act this time, it might take a few generations to see lasting results. In other words, we have to brace for impact. Self-care receives a bad rep because it has been used by the industrial complex to push sales and convince people that they should change who they are in some capacity. I think that while there are many definitions of self-care, the most appropriate and effective one is that it is a way of figuring out your needs and finding the most loving way to meet those needs. So, for example, if you realize that you need dopamine, what would be the most loving way to meet that need? Something like scrolling on your phone could be the easiest way for sure, but is it the most loving way? Depending on your specific circumstances, you will find that focusing on the most loving way to meet your needs will have you restructuring the way you make decisions. So a big part of practicing self-love and self-care, away from the nuances of capitalism and consumerism, is learning your needs and the most loving way to meet them. It becomes easy for you to allow other people to cross your boundaries when you make them responsible for meeting needs that you can meet yourself. For example, if I have been offended by someone that validates me and makes me feel beautiful, it is possible for me to ignore the boundary that they have crossed because I don't want to lose that validation that they offer me. Typically, we value our needs above our self-respect. And that is why it is easy to put up with disrespectful people as long as they meet some need. And while there are cases where this trade-off makes sense, in most cases, you are actually able to meet that need if you just figure out what it is. Learning your needs, however, is only half the battle. You also have to learn how to discern the most loving way to meet that need, especially because we live at a time when the options can be endless. If you are bored and you need stimulation, is texting your ex the most loving way to stimulate yourself? I don't know, babe. You could watch a movie instead. A few days ago, I needed a dopamine hit, and since I have mostly been off social media, I went on a shopping spree on the Shopzetu website. I picked out a couple of nice dresses that I convinced myself I will need in the near future, despite having enough dresses in my wardrobe. But just before I hit checkout, I considered the fact that my M-Pesa balance is not too happy and that spending that money would cause me some unnecessary stress between now and my next payday. The most loving thing for me to do at that point was closing that tab and finding other things to occupy my time. Later, when the Shopzetu team called to ask why I had not checked out, I was still very tempted. But I was also aware that buying those dresses would be unkind to my future self. And for me, that is a real self-care muscle. Always considering the most loving way to give yourself the things you need will allow you to build more self-trust. And before we talk about how to build self-trust, I'd like to note that the most important self-care step is checking in with yourself constantly. Checking up on yourself lets you know on a soul level that you are there for yourself no matter what. So find out how you are feeling. Be curious about how you can make your day better. What are you grateful for? What good things have happened to you in the recent past? When the socio-political contexts are especially antagonizing, you will have to dig within to find a reason to wake up each morning. So, what is going good for you right now? Also note that when checking in with yourself, you need to lead with curiosity and generally avoid being judgmental. All of your feelings are valid, even when they don't make sense. The goal of the check-in is to know what you are feeling and not to edit yourself for whatever reason. Journaling, for example, allows you to check in on yourself really easy. And if you'd like to get into that, check out last week's episode if you haven't. But if you really can't be bothered to write every day, you can record voice notes and save them in a secure folder so that you are able to go back and see how you've been doing. I think recording these check-ins, whether on paper or through audio, will keep you accountable to yourself because if you just do a mental check-in, the habit will fall through the cracks with no way to keep track of your commitment. Another important practice here is self-accountability. The world lets us down every day. People break their promises all the time. But real self-care requires that you practice self-accountability so that you can build self-trust. Self-accountability is when you do all the things that you promise yourself you're going to do. By making a habit of keeping promises that you've made to yourself, you enable yourself to always count on you. Your brain will only trust you if you show it that you are willing to always show up for yourself. And this can seem very simple, but how often do you break a promise that you've made to yourself? Sometimes, I commit to doing yoga in the morning before leaving the house because it allows me to feel lighter and move easily. When I don't do it, I break my self-trust. And yes, the consequences of not stretching my body are always a problem. But a bigger problem for me is that I start losing trust in my capacity to show up for myself, which affects how I show up in general. Loving myself how I like to be loved ensures that I do not feel unlovable. When I have shown myself that I can consistently show up for myself, I have the experiential high ground to demand that the people in my life also show up consistently. Otherwise, I will be making unacceptable compromises because I do not show up for myself like that. So it feels hypocritical on my part to expect anyone else to do so. And it is important to acknowledge that we often use our own relationship with ourselves as a parameter for what bullshit we can take from others. So when you don't have self-accountability, it becomes difficult to hold others accountable for the way they treat us. But without centering others, self-accountability will also enable you to generally feel better in your own skin. You will know that no matter what's happening outside, you got you. And sometimes showing up for yourself actually means cultivating friendships that can be your support system when you're in distress. It is not about isolation or self-sufficiency. If anything, having self-trust allows you to be more vulnerable with your people because you are coming from a safe base. Boundaries are one of those concepts that get very misconstrued. We all have some inbuilt boundaries, which are just limits to how much disrespect we can take. And all we have to do is figure them out, communicate them, and enforce them where necessary. I know at the end of every year we talk about cutting people off, but the more difficult step that we like to skip is communicating our boundaries and troubleshooting to understand why the boundary is being crossed in the first place. Unless there is malice in your interactions, I don't think your people will set out to violate your boundaries. It is possible, but it is not the first assumption that I would make when dealing with someone that I care about. For most people, the problem is that you are not even aware of the boundary, and when it got violated, you just know that you felt offended. The other person may not have had any idea that they were offending you. So it becomes your job to communicate that their actions made you feel bad and that going forward, you would appreciate them not doing whatever it is that they did to offend you. If the person does it again, then go on and sharpen the scissors. The most important conversation on boundaries as relates to self-care and self-love is that your boundaries will be crossed time and again. And it is very normal to not even know that you have a boundary until it is crossed. When a boundary is crossed, you are likely to have a familiar physical sensation. Observe how your body feels when you are offended, and then you will always know when your boundaries are being crossed. It might take some practice, but once you are aware of the physical sensations, it gets easier. Alafu, when you realize that you're feeling offended over a boundary that you did not know you had, do not judge yourself harshly over it. Rather, meet yourself with a lot of compassion and acknowledge that you are now in a better position to protect yourself in relation to that boundary. Then, do the hard work and communicate that boundary to the people that it pertains to. I find myself struggling with communicating boundaries, so it is a continuous effort to do it. An episode on self-love and self-care would be incomplete without considering the subject of self-talk. And I know the memes have normalized a lot of negative self-talk and self-deprecating humor, and we laughed so hard at that shit. But now, we shift gears and do better. I recently had a friend tell me that she's an overthinker, and I found that a bit odd because I had never considered her as such. So I asked her to describe herself, which she did, rather candidly, for over 5 minutes. And yet in all that time, not once did she say she was an overthinker. While one might argue that you have to be an overthinker to talk about yourself for over 5 minutes, I don't think that was the point. There were many other adjectives that slipped into how she described herself. She mostly talked about her work and her numerous journeys through young adulthood and how much she had had to live through in order to get to where she is now. And it was a very powerful bio that I wish I was writing it down. I then read something on how our brains evolved to be hyper-focused on negative attributes that put us at risk, so that we can correct the risk and keep ourselves safe out in the wild. And for some reason, we haven't evolved out of that trait yet. The only difference is that the risk we perceive right now is the risk of rejection. Anything that appears as a reason for which you can be rejected by our peers and our communities ends up occupying a lot of space in our minds. And if you find yourself constantly highlighting the things that you think might get you rejected, I just want you to know that that is your very misguided attempt at rejecting yourself so that the eventual rejection by others does not come as a surprise. Unfortunately, the rejection will still hurt even if you reject yourself every day for a whole year. So, next time you find yourself at the brink of some negative self-talk or self-deprecating humor when you're nervous, stop your mouth from moving. Like literally just clam up. You do not have to give life to those thoughts by speaking them out. And then in a minute or two, if you're no longer that nervous, try to lead with compassion and curiosity while reframing these thoughts. If, for example, the initial thought was that you are such a tardy person and you always make people mad by showing up late to meetings, compassion will reframe it as I've been really struggling with time management. And curiosity will add, but I am getting better at it and I will start showing up early for my meetings. The compassion here is you recognizing that you do not choose to be late and that it actually upsets you too sometimes. The curiosity then recognizes that you can get better if you commit to learning some time management skills. With most of your negative habits, I would encourage you to take this compassion and curiosity approach. If you want to change something, reframe it and be curious as you explore the solutions. So if you procrastinate a lot like I do sometimes, my curiosity allows me to ask how much I can get done in the next 1 or 2 hours, and I end up clearing my whole to-do list before sitting down to binge watch a show. The goal here is to not let the things that you're unhappy about become your identity. My overthinking friend does not like the fact that she overthinks, and yet, through her negative self-talk, she allows it to be her identity. Do not do that to yourself, babe. You deserve to see yourself through a more holistic lens that highlights your magic just as much, if not more than your shadow. The last self-care practice that I would like to recommend today is that you should have a ritual that allows you to not only call back your energy, but also take down the heaviness. And yes, if ritual sounds a little too witchy for you, that's intentional. As a part of the practice of listening to yourself and knowing what you need, I expect that you will become more attuned to when the emotionality of this situation is beyond your comfortable capacity. And since the goal is not for you to get burnt out, you should be able to take a breath when you need it. While womaning is a full-time job, give yourself permission to step back from the battlegrounds when it becomes too much. Depending on what works for you, there are many ways that you can end the day or the week and give yourself a clean slate to rest and maybe lick your wounds. Whether it's dinner with your girls, a herbal bath, a sensual massage, a date night with a book, or even a quiet movie night, I recommend you do something that is purely for the sake of relaxing your soul. This ritual will give you a moment to exhale and put it all down. Because to be honest, we are carrying way more than we need to and no one will teach us otherwise. So it remains up to you to figure out how to let go so that you can breathe easy again. Remember that for it to be a ritual, you have to do it regularly and it must mean something to you. For example, sometimes when I take a long hot shower after a tough day, I visualize myself washing all that heaviness away, and it works for me. You might need to try a few different rituals if you don't already have some in your arsenal, and it is my sincere hope that you will find something to replenish your soul from within in these dark times. You can go on and buy the flowers and scented candles, but the real self-care takes work. And while it will not change the reality that we live in right now, it is my sincere hope that it will make your life a little more bearable as you battle the very steep odds of activated misogyny. If you want to dive deeper into self-care and self-love, I want to recommend 2 books that you can read. The first one is The Real Self-Care by Dr. Pooja Lakshmin. This book teaches a self-reflective practice that takes you away from what you think self-care is and allows you to make an internal shift in the way you make decisions and how you love yourself, away from the expensive skincare ideas. My favorite thing about the book is that she doesn't just talk about everything that is wrong with the Instagram version of self-care. She also offers a candid explanation on what real self-care entails, thus giving you a guide on how to really take care of yourself on the day-to-day. The second book I recommend is The Inner Workout by Taylor Elise Morrison, which is also about the real self-care work beyond just buying stuff. Like the first book, this book also provides a very clear guide on how to identify your self-care needs, complete with prompts that will help you to evaluate yourself and then make the necessary changes in your daily routine. A key takeaway from these books for me is that self-care should be a part of your daily routines, and it requires a lot of self-compassion and inner work. Centering yourself, building a solid relationship with yourself, and being comfortable in your own skin is how you win in this very rigged game called life. And I'd like to end this episode here by wishing you ease and lots of safety. May your gods continue to keep you.